I think there's something to be said about books and where it makes sense in someone's journey, whether you are in business, marketing, or self development, whatever it may be. There's this notion that people push, creatives push, that the kind of virtue signaling that they say books are bad, books are not good, or they don't really say not good, but they say you just read them and you don't really take action with them, which I get what they're trying to go for. But I have a little bit of different view where some would say when I was beginning in my marketing business, I wasn't reading books. I was doing straight action for 12 hours a day, XYZ. And that's great. I think you have your phases, but I'm going to give my opinion on this because this is coming from someone who's running $130 or help running $130,000 per month community. And so I want to give my opinion on this. I am only about like 3 years or so in the marketing business. A lot to grow. I've started from a short form editor and now have scaled up my ranks to the marketing lead in this agency. So I want to give my input on this. By no means take this with a grain of salt, a big grain of salt. Just my 2 cents. That's all it's worth. And so I want to kind of give this opinion on this because I've been thinking about this recently. Thinking about this idea that okay, well, people say books are bad, or I see a lot of creators. Some creators say I don't even read at all. I'm like, that's crazy. I'm like, for me, I need it. I need that information source, and so I started to unpack this idea, and it gets a lot more complicated as you go, but it made more sense recently, and so that's why I'm compelled to really give this video, because to really look at the landscape, we see someone like Alex Hormozi who says, okay, I'm not reading. I didn't start reading until after maybe a couple years into my business until I was successful. And then when I read, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Like it just reconfirmed a lot what he already found out himself, which is great. When you look at a lot of these people, when you look at someone like we could say Mr. Beast, when you look at really anybody who's been into learning mastery, mastering the skill of what they're doing, a lot of times they will say, "Oh, it was purely all action. I didn't have any resource to help guide me." But just because they did that doesn't mean they didn't have resources to guide them as well. They didn't have books. They didn't have stuff they read. They didn't have things that they kind of brought in to what they're doing to be able to output exactly that. And so one of the big things for me, I think, recently was the idea of okay, what is the purpose of books? What is the actual foundation for why I find books so valuable? Not just because of the information, but how does someone else who's maybe starting their journey really make it more applicable for themselves and where it makes sense? And I want to start off with just one sentence first where I haven't read the book, but I want to. I heard it mentioned. And it was this idea that you should ready, fire, aim. And when you break that apart, ready, it plays on the typical ready, aim, fire, which everyone kind of knows, and it changes those last two. And so it says ready, fire, aim. And so the idea is you want to put action in, and then you pivot as you go. You configure as you go. And I think that's the biggest kind of takeaway from all this, uh, in this whole journey of what I've learned. And I find myself when I'm like Richard say learning like ads or I'm learning management, I'm learning how leadership. I find that I can read these books and there's kind of two approaches you could take with this. You could read the book early, which honestly I kind of suggest. You read the book early or read it you get your hands on as much as possible around your field and you read it. Now, are you going to really internalize it? No. But I find that if you try to keep on stuff in that book, like, okay, I'm trying to learn this, I keep on reading, rereading, I keep on rereading, you might pull out different pieces. But what happened is, and what I usually find happen, I'm like, okay, that's good. But I don't know, like, maybe I took like one piece from it that was kind of helpful. But yeah, I don't know about the rest of it. But that's completely fine. And that's the whole point is to give exposure. The first time you read it is exposure. So that's the first time. And that's like maybe you don't even have the problem with it. And this is why I noticed just time and time again it worked the most best. Is I'll read the book, get exposure to it, then maybe weeks, months later, I'll actually start to have a problem when I'm growing into that responsibility and I'm like having problems. And this is where books become extremely helpful is when you start to have a problem and just because you read it, it feels like it just came from your mind naturally. You're like, what if I did this? And like you don't even think about like, oh, that didn't come from me. That came from a book that I got exposure to and just felt natural. And that's what I've noticed for me, and I think that's the big debate that people don't mention. They're like, "Oh yeah, I've read all these books. I've read these like self-help books. I've read these certain books." But I don't think it's the idea of like, okay, yes, like there's the concept of okay, just keep on rereading the book until you internalize it. But I feel like sometimes that at some point that might be kind of stuffing your brain rather than actually applying it to your life, if that makes sense. Very similar to how school does it, where you're just kind of regurgitating and being a parrot versus um, actually really internalizing and understanding it. Now, there's time and place for that, but I think the biggest thing I learned, and I'm starting to see like more clearly with it, is sometimes I'll start to read a book. I'm like, I'm just not motivated. And I don't like the word motivated, but I just have no interest to read this. And that's because I just don't have the maybe I just don't have the like I'm not in the right place to read it, if that makes sense. And so I picked up a book from I think it was Meta CEO or this the CMO for Meta. He made a book. I think it's called Click Here, and it's on ads. I'm not into ads yet, but I was like, okay, it might be good if I start learning it because I want to get into ads. And at the time, I wanted to get really into ads, but I just haven't touched them because I've been focused on other stuff. But I did read about like 20 pages, 30 pages, and the first point he had is what is your North Star? What is your are you trying to achieve and such with everything? And I'm like, huh. I'm like, that's a really good point. So I closed the book and just went on. Now I did open the book up like a couple weeks later, try to read a couple pages, but I'm like, okay, whatever. And I think a lot of times when those cases happen, you might realize that okay, this he outlined this first point. I want to really focus on this one specific point first, and then maybe once we get more into when I get more into the weeds of actually doing that thing, I'll come back to this book and start reading it and really take it all in. And so I think it's not really specifically being very like as you will tight on like okay I have to take away tons of things from this book the first time I read it. I have to take away or I have to keep on rereading it until I understand it. It's like no, it's like when you go to if you're like a 20-year-old and I don't this is just like for example, but this is concept or I heard this like idea where it's like when you are a 20-year-old and let's just say you read a religious book, there's a lot of parables in it, there's a lot of takeaways, a lot of lessons. It's going to be different compared to someone who is what you say 30 or 40. They're going to have different life experiences. They're going to have different problems, different struggles, different um, just situations in their life that's going on. And when you start to take that and they reread the like the religious passages that maybe you read or yeah you read at 20 compared to maybe when you're like 40, you could have a different maybe takeaway from it. Maybe you might have very similar or you might be completely different parts of it. You're like, oh, I resonate with that, I understand that part now. And so and your takeaway is different, and I think that's a big thing about it is first time you can have exposure and you can have your initial thoughts. But then once you actually maybe try it out, or once you're in the weeds, now you start to understand where maybe the writer's coming from. Maybe you start to understand certain pieces that just make more and more sense. And so I don't know if this really makes sense. It's just something I just been on my brain recently because I read that Click Here book, and then also I read recently the 10X book by Grant Cardone. I'm like, this would be cool if I could implement this, but I don't know if like how to implement it. Like obviously he outlined like oh just 10x your like set a target 10x it, but I'm like I feel like like I'm kind of understand it sometimes, but sometimes I don't. But then I have a couple different life experiences where someone says, "Oh yeah, like they're a leader. They're just trying to set outlandish goals so like you guys can push further than what he actually would originally set, and it's all meant to just kind of push you and go." And I'm starting to step more into a leader, so I'm like, okay, like how do I like start to look at this? How do I start to really shape where the marketing goes with this? I'm like, I can't be looking at, oh, I want 10 signups. I should be looking at this as what is the goal if we were to get 10x that? So maybe instead of 100, heck, let's make it 10,000. Let's make it 10,000. I'm like, well, that's a lot of signups. And so when we do that, when I start taking pieces of this, it's all coming together. Like it's all just like a neural network of just different like points and a bigger kind of connectivity that like everything starts to line up. And so I think that's a huge benefit of reading is that point. And so where I said specifically ready, fire, aim, I think it just becomes a lot more clearer, and that's the way I personally look at books and how useful they are. And just even videos, YouTube videos. They're easy to watch, but is there really a main takeaway you can take from it? Maybe. Maybe it's exposure. That's fine. And that's completely fine. Like sometimes it's just getting exposure so you're able to have more of a conversation with maybe an AI on it, or maybe you can start to look more, dive into deeper facts and actually start getting the weeds and getting the action with it. It's just having that pure exposure in the first place to be able to understand like how the tool works, or how the like what's the mindset kind of going into this that I should have before jumping in. And so that's kind of my takeaways. I don't know if it's worth anything, but at least on my end, it makes sense, and it's how I kind of function over time and kind of evolved in the process. So I'll see you in the next video.